Ambassador Arun Singh, you've heard some of these comments. Before I come to the specifics of the defense deal, for example, your sense of what is likely to happen in the next few months, in the next few years? There are obviously lots of positives to be building on in the next few months. Mr. Bhadrakumar said there could be that Russia question shouldn't be buried entirely. Could that come up? Election campaigns are going to be happening. Could the democracy questions again come up, and the domestic criticism that we've seen in America from sections of the Democratic Party, could that come up? Or are things going to be fairly smooth, you think, from here on?
So I think, Vikram, as we discussed, a lot of major decisions have been taken. Now it's a question of implementing them. I have found, based on my experience in India-US relations, that it is important to sustain high-level attention on taking the relationship forward. Because, of course, now we've reached another level. This visit is being described as transformational. Still a new relationship. This phase started in 2000. So if this high-level attention is not sustained, it does run into problems. And it happened, for example, in 2012-13. Because after the civil nuclear agreement, after Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's visit in 2009 for a state visit, President Obama's visit in 2010, when he declared support for India's permanent membership of UN Security Council, at the high level, at the top level, attention veered off. The government in India was having difficulties on its own. There was a lot of focus, for example, at that time on the MMRCA deal, an expectation that perhaps US may have a role there, and that didn't work out very well. So with all that high-level attention faded off, and suddenly the critics of the relationship, including in Congress and elsewhere, they became stronger.
Okay.
Now, we have to ensure that as we are now entering the election cycle in India and the election cycle in the US, that at the high level, attention remains on the relationship. Otherwise, the challenges could start again. So the good thing here is that President Biden is likely to be coming here for the G20 summit in September.
Right.
There will be a Quad summit in 2024, although dates are not indicated. But the summit will be hosted by India, and the US president will be coming for that. So these two events will be action-forcing events. And they will force the two systems, the two establishments, to try and make progress on whatever has been worked out at this stage. And that will sustain the relationship. So I think we should watch
high-level symmetry would be one of the things. The other thing perhaps would be, this time, unlike after the nuclear deal, where there was a long period when nothing was done, no actual nuclear plants were set up out here by the Americans, which caused American companies to have some heartburn. This time there are some specific deals being done. And let me just get in former Chief of Air Staff R.K.S. Bhadoria in on that question. Sir, the Air Force, I just want to get your sense of the deals that have just been done. The drone deal seems massive. The GE engine deal, the fact that HAL can now have that technology to power not just the Tejas Mark II, but potentially all the other aircraft that it is planning to roll out, co-production, transfer of technology. Do you think this is transformative? And do you think this, as the Air Force would be delighted right now with what could come in the next few years?
Oh, absolutely transformative and very, very critical for the state we are presently in terms of our aviation ecosystem and developing our own fighters. And also, as far as drone is concerned, the critical gap that we currently have in our ability for 24/7 monitoring, surveillance and reconnaissance, be it for intelligence or for continuous surveillance in our areas of concern or areas of interest, both on the land borders and over maritime. So these two were critical aspects. And I think from that angle, it is really transformative. GE particularly so from the point of manufacturing setup, the engine will give us a complete ecosystem in engine manufacturing, and Predator, of course, towards capability building and getting that critical gap filled.
How do you also see the talk that is happening on space and the Artemis Accords? That's future technology. That's a direction in which things might move. I'm sure the Air Force has had its eye in space also at some point or the other. Do you think that's also transformative?
Oh, for a long time, we've had our eyes from the beginning on space, and it is really critical. Our interactions that have happened and what has been decided in terms of space, in terms of cyber, and in terms of some of the other technologies that is being talked about, be it AI, quantum, interaction at research level, joint projects, be it high power computers. These are the areas for the future. And cyberspace and space capability itself, I think, is critical for the future. So developments in this field are equally important, and in some respects, I would say more important for the future. And from Air Force perspective, again, and for the defense services, entire defense service perspective, hugely important, very, very critical for our future.
Right. And one last question, Mr. Bhadoria, as the former Chief of Air Staff, you must have been evaluating the drones, and these are not cheap drones, these are expensive drones. You must have said, should we be buying these Sea Guardians and Sky Guardians and Predators, cost nearly as much as a fighter jet? Think this is the right call, and these are really important advanced technologies that can be used, not just in the seas, but also by the Air Force and by the Army.
Oh yes, cost was really an issue, one of the issues that when we dealt with this and when we were evaluating. Also, we wanted to give a fillip and a chance for our own indigenous industry. DRDO was doing a lot of work. But the gap that existed and the pace at which indigenous development was taking place, especially in the range of sensors, you need high altitude, you need to look at depth, you need to be sustain your drone there for a longer duration. So 30 plus hours, at very high altitude, you look deep inside. Those were critical areas, and the kind of sensors this has. So from that aspect, this limited induction, I think, is absolutely the right step from point of view of its requirement and the capability jump it will give to the forces.
All right, former Chief of Air Staff, R.K. Bhadoria, thank you so much for joining us. You've helped us understand the importance of those specific deals. Michael Kugelman, let me just come back to you. There was entire generations of technology denial. It was one of the basis on what a lot of the discussions were taking place 10 years ago, 15 years ago. With all that's happened right now, is the question of technology denial or the possibility of technology denial now firmly in the past, because the US clearly seems to be doing things with India that it doesn't even do with the closest of allies?
Right, absolutely. And that gets to what was said earlier about how it's important not to overstate the notion of the necessity of an alliance to make a relationship, to make a security partnership really work. And indeed, yeah, I mean, that's why this jet engine deal is so critical. Talking about 80% technology transfer. And indeed, you're right, unprecedented for U.S.-India relations, and I think unprecedented for the U.S. and any of its relations across the board. But look, I mean, clearly, something clicked over the last few months, right? And I think we've been discussing how there's always, for quite some time, been discussions about the need to focus on dealing with constraints that have hampered greater levels of technology transfers. But things haven't moved forward, whether it's because of bureaucratic concerns or policy issues or whatever the case may be. But I think that you could look to several milestones, certainly ISET being one of those. The fact that you have this major new initiative focused on strengthening cooperation on technology that's led by the national security advisors in each country, that's so critical because that has the capacity to keep the bureaucracy at bay, so to speak, in both countries, and allowing there to be the types of forward movement on moving past these denials of technology transfers, whatever the case may be. So, yeah, and that's not to say that there's still a long way to go. I mean, these export control issues continue to loom large, but I think what's important here is that there are now formal mechanisms in place, such as ISET, as well as this relatively new strategic trade dialogue that was just launched, at which you're going to have frequent, regular engagements on high levels to work through these lingering questions and concerns about export controls.